Beneath the divided city of Berlin, a secret operation was underway, a tunnel so dangerous, so bold that it could have started World War III if discovered. Who built this tunnel? Why was it hidden? And how did it almost change the Cold War forever? After World War II ended in 1945, Germany was completely destroyed and its capital, Berlin, lay in ruins. The victorious Allied powers decided to divide both Germany and Berlin into 4 occupation zones controlled by the United States, the United Kingdom, France, and the Soviet Union. Although Berlin was located deep inside the Soviet zone of East Germany, it too was split into sectors. The eastern part came under Soviet control, while the western part was administered by the Americans, British, and French. This division quickly turned Berlin into a symbol of the growing tension between the communist East and the capitalist West. Life in the two halves of the city became dramatically different. In East Berlin, the Soviet Union imposed strict control, censorship, and a communist economic system. Meanwhile, in West Berlin, freedom of speech, democracy, and Western culture flourished under the Allied powers. Over time, the differences between the two sides became so visible that Berlin was called the front line of the Cold War. Families were split, friends were separated, and spies roamed the streets. What once was a single city had now become 2 worlds divided by ideology and mistrust, setting the stage for one of the most intense power struggles in history. In the years after World War II, Berlin became the perfect place for espionage. It was a divided city surrounded by conflicting powers, yet still full of movement, tension, and opportunity. Both the Western Allies and the Soviet Union saw Berlin as a key battleground, not with guns or tanks this time, but with information. The CIA and the KGB sent dozens of agents into the city, each trying to uncover the other's plans and recruit informants. Berlin's streets, cafes, and government offices turned into a web of double agents, secret meetings, and coded messages. During the 1950s, the Cold War was heating up fast. The world lived under the shadow of nuclear weapons, and both superpowers feared that a single mistake or misunderstanding could spark World War III. At that time, the Berlin Wall did not yet exist, which made it easier for people and spies to move between East and West. Secret tunnels, safe houses, and radio transmitters were hidden across the city. Every whisper, every phone call, and every movement mattered. Berlin was not just a divided city. It was a city built on secrets where every shadow could be watching and every handshake could be a trap. In the early 1950s, as the Cold War intensified, the United States and Britain decided to take a bold step to uncover Soviet military secrets. Their intelligence agencies, the CIA and MI6, joined forces in one of the most daring espionage operations of the era. This top-secret mission was known as Operation Gold, or as the British called it, Operation Stopwatch. The goal was simple yet incredibly risky: to tap into the Soviet communication cables buried deep under East Berlin and listen to the enemy's most confidential conversations. The operation required extreme secrecy and trust between the two allies. Engineers, intelligence officers, and technical experts worked side by side, building a plan that combined American resources with British experience in covert missions. Every decision was made with caution, as even the slightest leak could alert the Soviets and destroy the entire effort. Together, they planned to dig a tunnel beneath one of the most heavily guarded borders in the world, hoping to gain access to valuable Soviet information without anyone ever discovering what they were doing. It was an ambitious gamble, one that pushed the limits of Cold War espionage. The main goal of Operation Gold was to secretly connect to the underground telephone and telegraph cables that the Soviet military used in East Berlin. These cables carried thousands of conversations and coded messages every day between Soviet commanders in East Germany and Moscow. If the CIA and MI6 could tap into them, they would gain direct access to the Soviet Union's most private communications, information about troop movements, military plans, and political strategies. To make this possible, American and British engineers designed advanced listening devices capable of recording signals without being detected. They planned to place these devices deep underground, connected directly to the Soviet lines. Every conversation that passed through the wires could then be captured, translated, and analyzed. It was an extraordinary technological challenge, because the cables were buried several meters below the surface and heavily protected by Soviet patrols. Yet if successful, the tunnel would become one of the most valuable sources of intelligence in the entire Cold War. A small, quiet neighborhood near Alt-Glienicke became the hidden starting point for one of the Cold War's boldest engineering feats. A team of American and British engineers surveyed the ground, studied maps of buried telephone trunks, and picked a spot where a shaft could be dug from the western sector toward the Soviet lines. Construction began in secret in 1954, and the work had to be planned like a military campaign. Timelines, materials, equipment, and cover stories all had to be arranged so civilians and Soviet patrols would notice nothing. Below ground, the work looked nothing like a spy movie scene. It was backbreaking, technical, and tightly controlled. Civilians posing as construction workers and actual military engineers installed timber supports, lighting, and a narrow track to move spoil out quietly. Intelligence officers coordinated which telephone trunks to target and when to connect listening devices. Soldiers and security teams patrolled the surface and nearby blocks, keeping curious neighbors away and maintaining fake construction sites to mask noise. Every piece of equipment and every cabling decision was chosen to avoid detection and to keep the tunnel operational for months. The planning also included contingency measures, protocols for sudden discovery, ways to hide or remove the tap hardware, and strict compartmentalization so only a few people knew the full plan. Even with meticulous planning, the project was risky. Workers moved in the dark, machines hummed under cover stories, and the whole effort depended on absolute secrecy. That combination of engineering skill, spycraft, and military discipline is what made the Alt-Glienicke operation possible in the first place. They tunneled 1,476 feet, which is about 449.9 meters, rounding, roughly 450 meter, equal to about 0.2795 miles, so just over a quarter of a mile, not a half mile. The length let them reach well into Soviet-controlled ground while keeping the entrance inside the western sector. But it was still a huge, risky undertaking that required careful pacing and constant secrecy. Work happened mostly at night. Crews moved quietly under blackout conditions, using muffled tools and hand carts on narrow tracks to carry out soil and debris. Above ground, teams kept up a cover story and created deliberate distractions, fake construction sites, staged deliveries, and noisy activities timed to mask the sounds of digging. Generators, engines, or deliberately scheduled roadwork and music were used at specific hours so any suspicious thumps or knocks below would blend into normal city noise. Everything was choreographed so the tunnel's progress stayed hidden in plain sight. By the middle of 1955, after months of exhausting and secretive work, the tunnel was finally complete. Deep beneath the soil of East Berlin, the CIA's technical teams managed to tap directly into the Soviet and East German communication cables. When the final connection was made, they began intercepting and recording thousands of phone calls and telegraph messages that passed through those underground lines every day. It was the first time Western intelligence had such a direct and consistent flow of information from behind the Iron Curtain. For the CIA and MI6, this was an extraordinary achievement. They could now listen to Soviet officers discussing troop movements, supply routes, and transport schedules, along with East German officials talking about political strategies and local security. Every message offered a small but valuable glimpse into the secret world of the Eastern Bloc. Analysts worked day and night to translate and decode the recordings, piecing together reports that helped Washington and London better understand Soviet military planning. For nearly a year, the operation ran smoothly, and it seemed like one of the greatest intelligence victories of the Cold War. What the CIA and MI6 didn't realize was that from the very beginning, the KGB was fully aware of their secret tunnel. A British double agent named George Blake had already revealed the entire plan to the Soviets even before the first shovel hit the ground. While working for MI6, Blake had secretly been passing information to Moscow, and among the details he handed over was the existence and purpose of Operation Gold. This meant that every step the CIA took, every cable tapped, and every piece of intelligence gathered was already known to the other side. The KGB, however, decided not to expose the operation right away. Doing so would have revealed that they had a mole inside British intelligence, something they couldn't risk. Instead, they chose to let the tunnel operate for months, carefully controlling what kinds of information passed through those lines. Some of the data might have been genuine, but much of it was likely filtered or even false, allowing the Soviets to manipulate Western intelligence While the CIA believed they had pulled off a historic success, the truth was that their victory was quietly being watched, managed, and even used by the very enemy they thought they were outsmarting. The shocking twist behind Operation Gold came from inside the very agencies that planned it. Among the trusted officers working for British intelligence was George Blake, a man whose calm manner and loyal appearance hid a devastating secret. During his time as an MI6 officer, Blake secretly became a double agent, working for the Soviet KGB. He had been captured during the Korean War and, after witnessing the destruction and suffering around him, his beliefs began to change. He came to see communism as a force for balance in a divided world, and when the Soviets approached him, he agreed to share British secrets in return. Before the Berlin Tunnel project was even completed, Blake had already informed the KGB about every detail: the plan, the location, the schedule, and the goal of tapping Soviet lines. This meant that the Soviets knew about the tunnel long before the first recording began. The KGB chose not to stop the operation immediately because they didn't want to reveal that Blake was their informant. Instead, they let it run, pretending to be unaware while carefully controlling the information that traveled through those cables. The entire time the West thought it was eavesdropping on Soviet secrets, the KGB was actually listening to them listening. A perfect example of how deeply deception defined the Cold War. In April 1956, after almost a year of secret operation, the Soviets staged what appeared to be a sudden discovery. Soviet troops and East German security forces arrived at the site near Alt-Glienicke and announced that they had uncovered an American espionage tunnel running under their territory. They presented it as a shocking violation of their sovereignty, calling it proof of Western aggression. Newspapers, radio stations, and official statements across the Eastern Bloc echoed the same message. The United States and Britain had been caught red-handed spying on the Soviet Union. Journalists and photographers were brought in to see the tunnel for themselves. Soviet officers guided them through the narrow underground passage, pointing to the cables and recording equipment as evidence of the so-called American crime. To the world, it looked like a major intelligence scandal and a propaganda victory for the USSR. But behind the scenes, both sides knew the truth. The KGB had known about the tunnel all along and had simply chosen the right moment to discover it. What seemed like an embarrassing defeat for the West was, in reality, a carefully timed performance designed to protect their secret source and strengthen the Soviet image during one of the most intense periods of the Cold War. Soon after the discovery, the Soviets turned the entire incident into a global spectacle. They invited reporters, photographers, and even foreign correspondents to visit the tunnel site. Cameras captured Soviet soldiers walking through the muddy underground passage, pointing out the listening equipment and communication cables as if unveiling undeniable proof of Western wrongdoing. The images spread across newspapers and newsreels, creating an international sensation. The Soviet Union skillfully used the discovery as propaganda. They accused the United States and Britain of violating their sovereignty and undermining peace in Europe. Soviet officials claimed this was yet another example of Western hypocrisy, preaching democracy and trust while secretly spying on their allies and neighbors. They portrayed themselves as victims of Western deceit, rallying public opinion across the Eastern Bloc and using the story to strengthen their control over East Germany. In reality, it was a staged victory. The tunnel had served its purpose for the KGB, and now it became a powerful political weapon in the Soviet campaign to paint the West as the true aggressor in the Cold War. When the news of the tunnel broke, the CIA and British intelligence agencies acted calm and confident, even though deep down they suspected something was wrong. Officially, they treated the Soviet discovery as nothing more than a stroke of bad luck, an accident caused by routine maintenance or random chance. Western officials released carefully worded statements denying any wrongdoing and downplaying the importance of the tunnel. They suggested that the Soviets had simply stumbled upon it while checking their underground cables. Inside intelligence circles, however, there was quiet confusion. The project had been so secret and secure that few could understand how the Soviets had found it so easily. But rather than risk exposing their own internal problems, the CIA decided to maintain the illusion that everything was under control. They never mentioned the possibility of a mole, and continued to act as if the operation had only been compromised by coincidence. For years, the truth remained hidden, that the real reason for the discovery wasn't luck or chance, but betrayal from within. Operation Gold came to represent the strange balance of brilliance and disappointment that defined Cold War espionage. On one hand, it stood as a remarkable example of Western engineering and intelligence cooperation. Building a tunnel nearly half a kilometer long under one of the world's most dangerous borders was an extraordinary technical and strategic achievement. It showed how far the CIA and MI6 were willing to go in the pursuit of knowledge, and for a time, it delivered valuable intelligence that helped the West understand Soviet communication patterns and military coordination. Yet beneath that success lay a deep irony. The same operation that demonstrated Western ingenuity also exposed the vulnerability of even the most secure intelligence agencies. Because of George Blake's betrayal, the entire project had been compromised before it even began. Every message intercepted, every conversation recorded, had already passed through Soviet hands. The tunnel became a symbol of how intelligence work during the Cold War was never clear-cut, where triumph and failure existed side by side, and every victory carried the shadow of deception. In the end, Operation Gold was both a technical masterpiece and a painful reminder that in the world of espionage, even the smartest plans could collapse under the weight of a single secret. Even with the KGB's knowledge of the tunnel, the information gathered during its operation proved surprisingly useful to the West. For nearly a year, before the Soviets staged their discovery, the CIA and MI6 intercepted a massive amount of Soviet and East German communications. Among the recordings were details about military logistics, troop positioning, and the daily routines of the Soviet forces in Eastern Europe. Although the KGB may have filtered some of the data, much of it was genuine and helped Western analysts better understand how the Soviet military operated. The tunnel became a rare window into the structure and discipline of the Red Army, and gave the West insights into the way the Soviet command system functioned under pressure. Intelligence officers in London and Washington were able to confirm patterns and strategies that would influence later Cold War decisions. So despite the betrayal, the operation wasn't entirely a loss. It proved that bold risks could still deliver results, even in a world where spies and counterspies constantly shadowed one another. Operation Gold showed that in the hidden war of information, success and failure could exist side by side, and sometimes even a compromised secret could still reveal the truth. The truth about George Blake's betrayal eventually came to light several years later. In 1961, British intelligence finally uncovered evidence proving that he had been working as a double agent for the Soviets all along. After an extensive investigation and a quiet internal search for the leak, Blake was arrested and put on trial in London. The court found him guilty of passing thousands of classified documents to the KGB, including the details of Operation Gold and the identities of many Western agents operating in Eastern Europe. His actions were considered one of the worst betrayals in the history of British intelligence. Blake was sentenced to 42 years in prison, one of the longest terms ever given for espionage in the United Kingdom. However, his story didn't end there. In 1966, just 5 years after his conviction, Blake managed to escape from Wormwood Scrubs prison with the help of fellow inmates and outside supporters who sympathized with his political beliefs. He fled across Europe, traveling secretly through East Germany, and eventually reached Moscow, where he was welcomed as a hero by the Soviet Union. For the rest of his life, George Blake lived comfortably in Russia, never showing regret for his actions. His escape turned him from a captured traitor into a living legend of Cold War espionage, a man who had deceived both sides and survived to tell his story. The Berlin Tunnel stands today as one of the most striking examples of the lengths both the East and West would go to outsmart each other during the Cold War. It represents the incredible ambition, secrecy, and determination that defined an era when the world was divided not just by borders, but by ideology and fear. For the Western Allies, it was a daring attempt to penetrate the Iron Curtain and gather vital intelligence that could help them understand Soviet intentions. For the Soviets, its discovery and exposure became a powerful weapon of propaganda, proof that the enemy was always lurking beneath the surface, sometimes quite literally. The tunnel symbolizes a world where technology, deception, and human courage intertwined in a constant struggle for advantage. Every inch of its construction reflected the silent war fought through hidden cables, coded messages, and whispered secrets. Though the Berlin Tunnel no longer exists, its story continues to echo through history as a reminder that during the Cold War, truth was buried deep underground where nations raced not just to survive, but to know more than the other. In the heart of a city once split by barbed wire, walls, and suspicion, the story of the Berlin Tunnel captures more than just a spy mission. It captures the spirit of an age defined by secrecy and struggle. Beneath the streets of Berlin, men risked their lives not with bullets or bombs, but with shovels, wires, and whispers. They fought a hidden war in the shadows, believing that every intercepted word could tip the balance of power in a divided world. As time passed, the tunnel was sealed, the city was reunited, and the Cold War ended. But the echoes of that underground operation still linger. The ground beneath Berlin holds memories of courage, betrayal, and the endless chase for truth between two rival worlds. In a city divided by fear and wire, a tunnel of secrets truly changed the course of history. The Cold War may have gone silent, but its stories remain alive, reminding us that even in darkness, history is always being written, sometimes deep beneath our feet. Would you risk everything, your safety, your freedom, even your life, for a secret that could change history? Tell us what you think in the comments below. Your thoughts bring these forgotten stories back to life. Thank you for watching Cold War Files, where hidden stories come to light and the shadows of history are explored one secret at a time. If you enjoyed this journey beneath Berlin, make sure to subscribe for more untold stories from the Cold War, because the past still has many secrets waiting to be uncovered.